Welcome everybody to our second Performance and Accountability Board. Welcome to those in the room, those watching online, or indeed those watching a recorded version. We will start with everybody round the table introducing themselves, and I'm going to start. I am Mark Shelford and I am the Police and Crime Commissioner for Avon and Somerset. Alice.
I'm Alice Ripley. I'm Chief of Staff to the Commissioner.
And Chief Constable.
And I'm Sarah Crew, Chief Constable for Avon and Somerset Police.
And Assistant Chief Constable.
Good afternoon, John Riley, Assistant Chief Constable, responsible for neighbourhoods, partnerships and response.
Thank you. Before we start, I'd like to take a moment to pay a tribute to the racial activist Roy Hackett, who sadly passed away this week. Mr. Hackett played a key role in the Bristol omnibus boycott during the 1960s, laying the foundation for the 1965 and 1968 Race Relations Act. We are still working hard to tackle racial inequality, with particular focus on disproportionality within our criminal justice system, and you'll hear more of that later. Chief Constable, I wonder if you'd like to add anything regarding the legacy of Roy Hackett and the others who stood with him.
Well, I'd share your tribute, absolutely. I think he was responsible, and those with him, for significant change with his work on the bus boycott. And that change happened here in Avon and Somerset. He did it by being organised and committed. And I think we have the opportunity to make change here in Avon and Somerset now by being organised as well, and to make real change that has the kind of significance that he had. A whole legislation and the whole way of working has changed as a result. I think that comes in the work we're doing on disproportionality, and I know we'll talk about it later. But I truly want to seize that opportunity to build on the legacy that Roy Hackett and others have left for us, and it starts here in Bristol and in Avon and Somerset.
Chief Constable, thank you for that. As PCC, there are two key parts to my role, which are to engage with the public about policing and to hold the Chief Constable to account for delivering effective and efficient policing. I've started this board with these two responsibilities very much in mind. I want everybody to be able to see, hear and judge for themselves how Avon and Somerset Police are performing. To help everybody do this, there are meeting papers published on my website. And in fact, this meeting is an opportunity for the people of Avon and Somerset to see how I'm performing in this part of my role as your PCC. And with the spirit of continuous improvement in mind, I very much welcome your feedback, and many of you fed back after the last Performance and Accountability Board. There is a short survey available on my website, and I would be delighted to hear from you. Before moving to the main agenda items, I'd like to deal with the actions from the last meeting. Chief of Staff.
So the first action was about the Avon and Somerset Police's Leadership Academy, and specifically the role it will play in tackling misogyny, which is of course also very relevant to item 4 in today's agenda.
So Chief Constable, please could you tell us your response to this action?
Okay, so the first thing to say, we've already delivered a very specific e-learning package called Where is the Line, for officers and for leaders on where the line is on appropriate behaviour. That is now part of our Leadership Academy officers, so it's not a one-off, it's part of our offer. We also have a programme commencing in September called Domestic Abuse Matters. Yes, it's focused on domestic abuse, but it's actually tackling attitudes and cultures around attitudes to women and violence against women and girls. That will go to 3,000 frontline officers, again, part of our Leadership Academy offer. We have a programme within the Leadership Academy already called Management Toolkit, and that prepares junior leaders, police officers, police staff for the role of supervisory responsibility. We're reviewing that at the moment, and we're incorporating the curriculum from the College of Policing's First Line Leaders programme, which has a specific module in its first module around misogyny. So in terms of supervision and frontline staff, I'm very satisfied that it's very embedded. We also have a unique programme in Avon and Somerset called Inclusive Policing with Confidence, which addresses building understanding of different communities. And in the next phase of the programme, we'll be specifically tackling misogyny. So I'm very satisfied that it's embedded. Lots more work to go. We always evaluate as we go along to see what's working and what's not and what difference it makes.
Thank you. And you will later on get some more questions around that in certain aspects of detail. Chief Staff, a couple more questions, please.
Yeah, so there was a second action, which was about Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary. At the last meeting, we saw that a large number of recommendations that the Inspectorate had made for improvement were over a year old and hadn't been formally closed. We can see from the report provided for this meeting that steady progress is being made. I think since the last meeting in May, 3 recommendations have been closed, and Avon and Somerset have submitted progress reports on 15 more recommendations, which are now with the Inspectorate to consider whether they can be formally closed. So I think that's a full update from that action.
So as PCC, I have a role to play in overseeing the implementation of these recommendations, and I will continue to monitor that progress through this meeting and to understand how that progresses. And of course, there's always continuous inspections going on from the Inspectorate, and there will be new recommendations all the time. But I'd really like to have a firm handle on where we are with those. Before we turn to the main agenda, just to remind that the public, there are 4 parts to this board. The first deals with key issues, the second identifying disproportionality report, the third is around performance, and then lastly there's further discussion normally around the HMIC FRS reports, and we'll come to those later. So this first bit, Chief Constable, is around key issues. So to start with, I want to say thank you and well done to the staff and you for Avon and Somerset Police, particularly in the control room, for being ranked as the fastest police service for answering 999 calls with an average time of 6.1 seconds. The police experience an increasing demand during the summer period. This increase is due to things like festivals, events, as well as increased car meets, raids, antisocial behaviour, and demonstrations, as we've seen a lot of. Chief Constable, how are you going to ensure that Avon and Somerset Police continue to answer 999 calls and 101 calls quickly, and that officers are attending in a timely manner during this busy period?
Okay, if I could deal with handling the calls first and then responding to them second. We have seen significant rises in the number of 999 calls we're receiving. I think that's a function of pressures in other agencies, so people call the police, but also pressures in other police forces. The system is set up that if one force is swamped by calls, they divert to a force that can handle those calls. And in Avon and Somerset, we've been very good at handling calls, so we often take on that extra demand. I think we're seeing at the moment around 212 additional, not projected, 999 calls every day that we're managing. That said, we are prioritising those and we are holding up our performance and our excellent performance. There is an impact on our 101 line necessarily, but over a number of years we've brought in many improvements to ease that demand, whether that's an answering service or a callback service, so people don't need to wait on the line, we'll call them back within a short time, or our online offer, which has significantly grown. That's seen us achieve that 999 performance. That's seen as having high performance around answering 101, even at those stretched. It's also seen as win some call centre awards. So that's not just police consult call centres, that's commercial call centres as well. So I think we've done well. We need to continue improving and looking at new ways of doing so. So new technology like live chat is something that we're exploring, but also many of our online, our growing online contact now is handled by our inquiry officers. So we're looking at how we can diversify the way we use our resources to be able to answer those calls. So call handling, holding up under pressure, responding to calls, as you say, Commissioner, the summer period, and by that I mean beginning of June to the end of September, we can project is always going to be challenging. That's incoming calls, but it's also demands upon our resources for big events like the Glastonbury Festival or indeed protest demonstrations. We also allow people to take leave, so that's always a balance to be made. And whilst we're growing as an organisation, there are some growing pains where we see our new officers going back to do their university courses. So it sounds like a challenge, it is, but it's a challenge that we can project and plan for. We use data very carefully in this force, and using that data, we actually plan all year. We have a demand and capacity group who plan for the summer every year, and we always review what we did the previous year to learn for this year. This year we have a policing operation in place called Operation Hibiscus, and during those very, very busy times, this sees the other parts of the organisation coming to help our response teams to answer those calls. We plan so that we try not to have any impact or minimal impact on our other core business. So by way of example, we don't abstract our police community support officers or our neighbourhood sergeants from their beat work. We do ask our beat managers, our neighbourhood officers, to respond if we need to, but only within their local area. So we monitor that very closely. What I can say is we also, like other agencies we hear about, we have something called our demand status plan. Often in others, the health service, for instance, you talk about we're in code red. We actually have 4 levels, starting with level 1, we're at business as usual. Level 2, escalation, right up to level 4, we're at critical performance. And our aspiration is to stay in level 1. And if we creep out of it, we have a series of interventions and escalations. I'm pleased to say that this year and this summer so far, we've only moved out of level 1 3 or 4 times for 3 or 4 shifts. And that was because of exceptional events that we couldn't predict for. So we haven't actually had to use any of those escalations or interventions beyond Operation Hibiscus. So as much as we will feel under pressure as an organisation now, it's actually being controlled and managed, and people are still receiving an appropriate level of service for the harm and risk that sits within their call.
Thank you, and I'm particularly pleased to hear about lessons identified and in this case perhaps learned from last year and previous years. I do get quite a lot of mailbags, letters and emails around 101 and extended time that people have to stay on that. What do you ever lose a 101 call if it's stayed on for too long? And if so, is there any way of getting back to them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we do look at abandonment of 101 calls to see whether we need to, where that's come from. Can we recall it? We're hopeful, though, that from our analysis, that the callback facility which we've introduced means that doesn't really happen as often because people don't have to hang on. So they can elect for, I'll have a call back, and we will simply call them back. So they can go about their daily business. Our aspiration usually is to do that within 20 minutes because of the demand pressures and us answering those 999 calls. now, that means it has been extended on occasions, but there should be no need for anyone to abandon. We will get back to them, or they can choose another route like online reporting.
What happens if you get a call back and it's at 2 o'clock in the morning and actually you quite like to be able to go to sleep and then take a call in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely. And that might be an option for an online. There are a series of choices that people can make, whether they select that choice to be able to do that. It may well be when at 2 o'clock in the morning, it's only at a certain point of the day that we are going to be under that amount of demand pressure. And we do aspire to get back really quickly. I think we try to be empathetic as well. We win prizes in that control room, not just for the speed at which we answer the phone, but the empathy and care and quality of care we give. So we are emotionally intelligent enough to know that we don't need to be calling back at 2 a.m. in the morning, but actually to stagger it to probably 7 a.m. in the morning or 8 a.m. when we have capacity. It's usually our evening periods and our weekends.
Well, Chief Constable, rest assured that if I call at 2 o'clock in the morning, you can ring me up at 5:30 because I was taking the dog for a walk. Right, moving on. In May, the College of Policing, the National Police Chiefs Council, published the new National Police Race Action Plan. The plan addressed a significantly lower level of trust and confidence amongst Black people and other disparities affecting Black people that policing cannot fully explain. For example, in rates of stop and search and arrest. The plan sets out changes needed for all police forces to become anti-racist and to reform or explain those race disparities. You'll recall that we had our own identified disproportionality report on the criminal justice system within Avon and Somerset, which we published in January to tackle disproportionality locally. But Chief Constable, can you explain how Avon and Somerset Police are responding to the National Police Race Action Plan?
Okay. Well, the first thing to say, we welcome the plan wholeheartedly. We think we've had a role to play in what it looks like. In fact, we seconded Chief Inspector Ronnie Lungu, one of our Chief Inspectors, currently the local inspector in Bath, local commander in Bath, to the college to help write that plan. And we think some of the work we have done here locally is reflected in it. We've also invited the lead, Deputy Chief Constable Tyrone Joyce, already into Avon in Somerset to listen to his insights, to take his advice and to share some of our insights too. And we've offered to be a trailblazer force for some of the actions and work that needs to take place. At a local level, as Chief Constable, I've been really clear that I'm personally accountable for this. This is not something I delegate responsibility for to anyone else. I do have a senior responsible officer. That's a chief officer. That doesn't happen with every improvement plan that we have in Avon in Somerset. That's Assistant Chief Constable Will White. Will has already set up a delivery group to deliver on the actions within the plan. The plan is structured around 4 areas. It's about protection of those communities, respect for those communities feeling they're involved in policing, and also they're represented in policing. And we have 4 strategic leads working under Will through that group with support functions, with subject matter experts to get real traction on the plan. We're already, one of the first steps the plan requires us to do is to rightfully engage with communities to get their feedback on the plan, and so we're using what's called the 5 steps framework, which is provided for in the plan to do that. We're also, because we have really good engagement mechanisms with our communities, asking how they more want to be involved. We have our independent advisory group network, for instance, to do that. We do also, a key tenet of the plan is really understanding culturally within our organisation, building empathy for Black history and the Black experience of policing, of society, and we're doing the inclusive policing with confidence work I've alluded to. We've already done some work, but we're planning for a week-long series of events and activities and learning events in October as part of Black History Month to take that forward. Data quality, i.e. how we record when people call us, things like ethnicity, is key to really understanding the different experiences of different groups, how it's different, whether that's the experience of stop and search or the experience of reporting domestic abuse. We've already set up under that structure a focus, task and finish group to drive improvement on that, because without that we can't measure success. Our overall aim here, as you say, is to quite overtly say we want an anti-racism strategy which delivers the actions of the national plan, but it also delivers against the recommendations of the Identifying Disproportionality report, which your office commissioned. But it also takes in learning. We've had a number of high-profile incidents that seen tension between us and those communities and confidence stretched, and we need to incorporate that learning as well within this. As I say, I'm personally responsible. I've spoken about this internally within the organisation through blogs, what I call courageous conversations, because it's a workforce issue as much as it is a community issue. But I've put myself on the line, I think, externally through my meetings with individuals, but what I've said in the public domain, and I think it's that important that I take personal leadership for it. So that's how we're planning to deliver it in Avon and Somerset.
Chief Constable, thank you. And you and I both have been approached a number of times by members of the community who feel that the conversations that we're having regarding racial disparity and inequality have been happening for a number of years, decades nay. So what's different now? And how will you ensure necessary changes are made and maintained to build that trust and confidence amongst Black communities?
I think this is a critical issue for policing, and by critical I mean I think this is critical for public confidence, and I think it's critical for the continuing survival of policing by consent, which is why I, as Chief Constable, choose to be personally responsible and to put myself on the line. It's not without some risks that I say these things, because I have to deliver on it. But I think I have to deliver on it because it's so important. So as an example of that, and I know we will go on to discuss it a little bit later, I volunteered to lead the cross-agency work on tackling disproportionality across our criminal justice system in Avon in Somerset here. So whilst I have some confidence through what I've just said about the Race Action Plan that I can deliver change in Avon and Somerset Police, it's not without risk that where I don't have direct authority and influence, that I want to influence that across the system. As I say, I think it's a critical moment. There have been moments before the Scarman report, the Macpherson report, but I think it's critical now that we move from talking into action and into real change in the lived experience of all our communities, but especially the Black communities who have lower levels of confidence in us.
Chief Constable, I completely agree with that, and in a moment I'll ask you some fairly pointed questions around the progress that we've been making. I'm now going to change to the second item on the agenda, which is identifying disproportionality report and the progress on that. Within our own report, the local plan on identifying disproportionality in Avon and Somerset criminal justice system, you'll be reminded that you remember that it was published earlier this year. The report contained a significant number of recommendations to help reduce disproportionality and racial disparity. I'm the chair of the Avon and Somerset Local Criminal Justice Board, which brings together all the partners and agencies delivering criminal justice across our area, and that's really from the police at one end to probation at the other end. Now, the Chief Constable already mentioned, but a subgroup of that board has been established to oversee and implement those recommendations of the report, because I want to see action. I don't want the report sitting on the shelf gathering dust. And I'd like to thank you personally, Chief Constable, for chairing that new group. However, I'd like you to tell me about the progress that is being made in implementing those recommendations.
Absolutely. I mean, something so important, it's important that we put proper resources and foundations in place, but also that we secure complete buy-in from the communities who want to see change, but also the agencies within the criminal justice system. So I and a small team have put lots of thought into how we do that. You will know that you and I have now jointly written to all of our partners in the criminal justice system at the executive level to seek their support and buy-in for the work that needs to happen. And we've asked for and we've had a commitment to come together to co-create and commit to a joint strategy of change which tackles disproportionality in our system in Avon and Somerset. As I say, it's critical that it's owned by us all, and it can't be driven just by one organisation. My job, working for you as the chair of the local criminal justice board, is to brigade together and co-create and shape both that will and commitment, but also the strategy and the plan to do it. We've already placed some resources into achieving that. And we already have a project manager, we already have a business analyst, we already have an improvement consultant, and we already have an infrastructure which I've just described within Avon and Somerset Police for its 41 recommendations, which are the lion's share, and I can talk more about what we specifically are doing. But the next stage for me is building that co-created strategy. So we've taken the step jointly of procuring an experienced consultant in this field. We've already gone through the procurement process, identified the individual, got them in, and as I walked here today, already in the building, already having meetings with key stakeholders in the community and in our partner agencies to get their views, to understand their perspectives, so that early September, when the annual leave period is over, we all come together to co-create our commitment and our strategy around a shared vision. The author of the report, in terms of stakeholders, Desmond Brown, is one of those key people the consultant is speaking to, but is another person who will be key within our team, and we've secured their ongoing involvement and support. And it's really critical that we give Desmond free rein to be critical and scrutinise us from inside. But I think it's also incredibly important for us to be held to account in public. So another one of the actions I've taken is to busy myself in talking to lots of people and to making my commitments in public. So I've been to the local criminal justice board to do that, but more importantly, I've been into community meetings and groups to do that. I've done that in front of the Commission for Racial Equality, indeed into local media as well, explaining and social media that making that commitment. So I think the ingredients are here now, the structure's in place, the resources are in place. It's a case of bringing people together, co-creating the vision, building out the team. I don't think that's quite enough resource yet, and we will need some input from our partner agencies to make that, to put the governance in around it so that we can measure progress and the performance framework. Lived experience needs to be a core part of the team also. And the last part is our communications and engagement strategy, which sees us doing this in public. This cannot be about a report that has recommendations that we all say are complete. This has to be about a change in the real change that we can measure in the lived experience and feeling of members of our community. That's the only thing that's going to answer that question of what's changed.
Chief Constable, thank you for that. And you won't be surprised when I say that at the next meeting of this type, I'll be asking you about the timelines for the delivery of that change and that lived experience. But now I'm going to change to focus on a couple of the specific points within the recommendations, and particularly around stop and search. I'm going to ask my Chief of Staff to go through those with you.
Thank you. So recommendation 13, I mean, you've touched on engagement already to a large extent, but recommendation 13 talks specifically about an engagement framework which is co-produced with communities, specifically focused on building confidence with those communities around police powers. Could you tell us how that work's being developed?
Yeah, absolutely. And I did promise to give a sense of the police recommendations. So this is one of 41 recommendations for the police that are being overseen by that delivery group that I've described, and they do all have a red, amber, green assessment against them and an owner, a named owner, and they're being closely monitored through that group. The recommendation 13 is around engagement around stop and search, and it's about how we engage with our communities, how we improve access to information about stop and search, and how we increase the transparency of stop and search. Now, Avon in Somerset, under the aegis actually and drive of the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, already has a well-established scrutiny panel for the use of stop and search, and indeed for a number of other police powers. And that scrutiny panel, very much in its constitution and its focus, is focusing on disproportionality in its work. It has been recognised by HMIC, FRS and the Independent Office of Police Conduct as a model of good practice when it comes to scrutiny processes. When it comes to information about stop and search, we report on our website, we provide information and reports about the data. I think we can do more in this space, and part of the work under the plan will see us doing more work to make it much more accessible and transparent to communities, what we're doing in relation to stop and search and how we're performing. One of the other things we're doing to kind of look at how we can increase our offer in this area is hosting or putting together a stop and search summit, which I think is being planned at the moment for the autumn, so that it is true co-creation and co-development, and that also services the kind of involved strands that we talked about within the National Police Action Plan as well.
Thank you. Can I move on to one further recommendation, which is also very much about that engagement, but with a specific focus on a youth scrutiny group. Could you tell us how you're going to engage the right people to join this group? And by that, I mean those who policing have traditionally struggled to engage with.
Yeah, okay. So we actually have had a first meeting of the Youth Scrutiny Panel for Stop and Search. It was held in Bristol with representatives, I think, from across Bristol, from local youth groups. It was a good meeting, and it forms a blueprint and a foundation for future meetings going forward in terms of structure and content. On the point of your question, was it representative enough of all the different ethnic communities within and backgrounds within Bristol, and particularly when it comes to stop and search, that constituent area? No, it wasn't. It was okay, but there more needs to be done. So we're working with local community groups and our neighbourhood teams in particular. The lead officer for this is the beat manager for St Paul's, to increase that representation. There's been a local scrutiny, local promotion around this on BCFM community radio, explaining our intent, and the lead coming on in a very articulate way, explaining what we're trying to achieve and seeking involvement. Through my courageous conversations in the community that I have been doing with the Commissioner since being appointed, I have built the trust of some community leaders who've invited me to go to the Riverside Youth Project, which actually is a place where the kind of people and the kind of groups and the young people we want to engage with are. And they've invited me to come along, Chief Constable to young people, to talk about the Youth Scrutiny Panel and how we can engage. And I'm hoping that by taking that personal step and showing my commitment and listening, that I might be able to persuade at least some of them to take part in the Youth Scrutiny Panel around stop and search. I think at the core of many of these things, plans and data and analysis aside, if we can build more understanding and empathy between frontline police officers and young Black people, I think we'll go a long way to make the change that we need to make. So this is critical for us.
Chief Constable, thank you for that. And to anybody who's watching this, if you've read the report, you have an interest in this work, and you're keen to understand the progress and get involved, please contact me, and the contact details can be got hold of through the website. Okay.
If I just might add a couple of quick points just in terms of both plans actually, and the scrutiny that comes from the Strategic Independent Advisory Group that took place last week. And I'm really pleased to report actually we had the first attendance from the Young People's Independent Advisory Group, with a young man from St Paul's that chairs that group. And I think we need to disaggregate the difference between a scrutiny panel and an independent advisory group that's there to give us some guidance, some insight and some constructive challenge. So I was really pleased to see that, and they will definitely be keeping an eye on both plans and holding us to account moving forward.
Good. That does sound like excellent progress. I'd quite like to come and see one of those when the next.
Well, I've been invited down in September, so once I go in September, perhaps I can introduce you to the following meeting if that's okay.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Right. Well, let's move on to section 3 of this board, which is around performance. Legislation requires me as the PCC to publish certain information. This is set out in the specified information order, which was amended last year. I now have a duty to publish a quarterly report showing the contribution of Avon and Somerset Police in achieving improvements against the national policing priorities. The first half of the performance report covers those national priorities. The second half of the report provides a similar overview, but in relation to my local police and crime plan. In particular, this time, our local priority 2, which is engaging, supporting and working with communities, victims and partner organisations. I get an awful lot of mail, email, telephone calls from both journalists and members of the public talking about drug crime. They're extremely concerned about it. I'm really pleased to see an increased number of drug disruptions in the most recent data. However, the number of recorded drug trafficking offences has not increased. Please, can you explain why?
So I'm going to turn to Assistant Chief Constable John Riley. John has been a leading light in our tackling of drug crime and drug trafficking. So no one's better placed than John to answer that question.
Thank you, Commissioner. I agree with your points. Drugs has a massive corrosive effect on our communities, and I agree with the points that you've made. And from a disruptions perspective, we work on a framework that covers 4 Ps, a 4 Ps approach, which is prevent, protect, prepare and pursue. And what that means in practice actually is working across the piece, not just on enforcement, but looking at how we safeguard young people through educational visits into schools, looking at how we can divert people away from the criminal justice system through our drugs education programme, visiting those that are vulnerable to exploitation within the community, particularly vulnerable members with our local authorities. But also it means enforcement activity, as you describe. And we've seen very clearly that take place across the force, both in Operation Scorpion, where we work with regional colleagues to make the Southwest a really hostile environment for those trying to traffic drugs, as well as some of the intensification weeks around county lines, where we work with regional colleagues and the Regional Organised Crime Unit and the National Crime Agency to bring the full force of sort of law enforcement together. That still plays out on a daily basis, where we work with other forces, particularly those forces that export drugs into this region, from the Metropolitan Police Service, from Merseyside, from the West Midlands. We've had some really good results in terms of coordinated activity. But I think it's fair to say that there's more that we can do. We have good plans in place to do that through Operation Remedy, where we're looking to enhance, refocus and reinvigorate that group along with an uplift investment of 54 officers across the force called Local Remedy, will be working on exactly local priorities raised by their communities, which will include drugs enforcement. And through that activity, again, still working with specialist teams within the organisation, serious organised crime teams, with the ROCUs and the NCA, we will see an uplift in pursue disruptions, and in fact disruptions across the piece, but predominantly in pursue, and therefore an increase in drug trafficking offences and bringing to justice those that commit this terrible offence. So yes, the disruptions have increased across the piece. There's some more work that we need to do, particularly in the pursue space, and we've got good plans in place for that.
Well, I'm pleased to hear that, but I'm also very concerned about the victims, because a lot of the people involved are victims and their houses are cuckooed. And also about that piece around education to stop the demand in the first place. What are part of that uplift going into those aspects as well?
Yeah, so within our early intervention cohort, we've got an uplift in schools engagement officers, of PCSOs and early intervention police constables that will exactly do that, because you're right, we can't enforce our way solely out of this problem. There has to be education and there has to be diversion. As I say, preventing young people becoming criminalised, but also identifying those that are vulnerable within our communities who are likely to be exploited, that we can come alongside and support and make sure the proper interventions are in place.
I mean, I heard the other day from somebody who was informed in the subject, whose child had, it wasn't from Avon Somerset, it was a child in a school somewhere else, who'd had a drug enforcement officer come to educate them. And they sounded like a blueprint to understand how to get hold of drugs. How are we making sure that we educate and reduce the demand, the unintended consequence of, in fact, increasing demand?
Really careful about the officers that we deploy into schools for obvious reasons, to make sure the messaging is absolutely correct. And it'd be difficult for me to comment on the story that comes from another force, but rest assured, we use specialist officers who've had the appropriate training, who've got very clear curriculum and lesson plans as they go in, to make sure the lessons are absolutely right for the audience.
And just last thing on that, is that lesson plan effectively a national lesson plan, or is it a locally one developed by us?
My understanding is it's developed by us. I think there is a lack of national coordination in this space, actually. I'd have to check exactly on the facts, but my understanding is it's something that we've developed ourselves locally.
Well, I think we might pick that up and do a bit more work around that in the future. But thank you for that. I think now I'd like to change to the big worry of the end of COVID, and also the fact that we've got a cost of living crisis that's going to come. What are we doing around anticipating that increase around crime in the autumn, when traditionally it actually reduces?
Absolutely. So the first point I'd say is we pride ourselves in Avon and Somerset Police at using data wisely, and that does allow us to analyse both and project where our demands are coming from, but also to understand our offenders, our victims, our hotspots, so that we can deploy our resources in a very intelligent way. And we know where our strategic areas of high demand, where our areas of vulnerability are. When we do, we can apply problem-solving methodologies with partners to target hard in those areas, but also to deal with the root cause issues. So that's part of our strategy anyway, but using data analytics, we're really focused on developing and enhancing and giving capacity, which is where Local Remedy comes from, to our neighbourhood policing teams to have all the tools in the box to be able to prepare and protect those communities. We've also made some changes to our intelligence and tasking functions. They're embedding as we speak at the moment, but that means on a momentary, on a daily, on a fortnightly, on a 6-monthly strategic basis, we're able to be flexible to changes in demand, identify crime trends and get on them quickly. But we need resources to do that. And so the uplift of not officers into policing, we're now 2 years of a 3 years programme. We're starting to see the new officers coming through, so we can increase the size of our organisation into particular areas. And proactivity and problem solving is one of those areas. And John has already mentioned enhancement of force-wide remedy, a refocusing of it into the neighbourhood crime area, the introduction of local remedy teams into our neighbourhood teams. There are other areas we can put proactivity, and we're planning to. So some extra resources into our rural crime team to support a new rural crime delivery plan, but also some extra capability in there in terms of technology as well. A proactive roads policing team as well, to get around and those criminals who are using the roads to be able to commit these kind of offences, to be disrupting and convicting them too. Integrated offender management is also a key tool that we can use. We know that when it comes to neighbourhood crime, particularly acquisitive crime, it's around 20% of offenders who commit 80% of that crime. So our uplift is enabling us to invest even more into our integrated offender management function, those that look at acquisitive criminals, to be able to prevent and deter them in the first place, but critically to resettle, rehabilitate, help them reform, remove themselves from the pathway that they're on. We'll see crime reduction as a result of it. So from data through to structure and investment and strategy, I think we're as prepared as we possibly can be, but we will keep monitoring that as we go.
Thank you. And the next meeting is in September, and I'd like also to talk then about your connections into the retail world around preventing shoplifting and dealing with that. And then secondly, the insidious crime of illegal money laundering, which I'm really worried about, and how we can help both regionally and very specifically, very locally, try and address those points with our neighbourhood teams. Absolutely.
A couple of comments on both of those, if I may. What we do know about that 20% of criminals who commit 80% of the crime, that acquisitive crime includes shoplifting. So if someone who's being driven to commit a burglary, if more opportunistically a shoplifting offers an opportunity, they will be using it. So by this approach, we are tackling the person, not just the crime type. And the illegal money lending absolutely is a concern for us as well, and our fraud protect capability that we're building and building the profile of will also help, because some of that is about messaging and enabling people to protect themselves.
Thank you very much. Well, in September, we'll come back to that. Oh, yes.
May I just add just another part? As part of our uplift plans, within my portfolio area, we've introduced a new superintendent within neighbourhood policing that oversees 3 strands, actually a continuum of how we look at these offences. So they're going to own crime prevention and early intervention. I know crime prevention is a subject you're very keen on, and through the policing crime plan. So let's deter people from being criminalised in the first place. If we're unable to do that, they will then oversee local remedy, but we will be really robust and relentless in a perpetrator focus and catch and convict these individuals. And the third strand is integrated offender management. So if we can't divert, we'll enforce it, and once we've enforced, we'll rehabilitate. So I'm really excited about that addition to the team, actually, that strategic oversight of those 3 areas.
Good. Well, in September, we'll address that in a little bit more detail. Now, this is not a question, rather more of an observation, and I acknowledge the early signs of improvement being driven by your project at Bluestone, which has seen both the number and, importantly, the percentage of charges increasing in cases of reported rape. It's still not good enough, but it has improved. When I look at the local survey measures of engagement, I note the incremental decline over a number of years of people being aware of what police are doing in this area to address, to tackle crime and antisocial behaviour. Do you think this increase of officers, which you just told us, alone will help turn this around, or is there more that you can be doing to address this?
Chief Constable. So the short answer, Commissioner, is no. There is more that we can do. I think we do need to acknowledge, though, that an increase in officers is really beneficial. It's important everyone in the organisation to engage with the communities that we serve. And I think it's really important, if we're going to continue to have policing with consent, that people understand what we're doing. And the point you're making really is around, we're tackling the crime, but actually let's tackle some of the fear of crime as well through that engagement. What are we doing and how can people be involved? So as you know, and thanks for your support, we're increasing the size of our corporate communications department, both in terms of capacity and capability. which will give us an additional benefit strategically to really deliver messages both internally to stakeholders, but most importantly to the community. But probably the most important part of that, and actually it isn't alone for neighbourhood policing, but neighbourhood policing has a specific focus on engagement. And we've been refreshing our community engagement strategy for the force, but also accompanying plans at local level, recognising the differences that take place across the force and equipping our staff with the skills and the confidence to do that. So COVID certainly has had an impact. And I think we've probably reduced in that space, and that's somewhere we really need to focus our activity. So there are plans in place. We also are using social media to amplify the engagement that happens out on the ground, using Instagram and Facebook, which provides really good metrics actually about the reach that we can have within communities. I need to stress one size doesn't fit all. So we do recognise that all communities are different and we need to have a different range of messaging to reach everybody. And that's where corporate communications can really assist. So the short answer is no, it will help because it's everybody's responsibility, not just neighbourhood policing, but we have strong plans in place to address that moving forward.
Well, thank you for that. The one area that you didn't mention on that corporate communications was how you wish to affect the criminals and how you wish to act as a deterrent to the criminals by your corporate messaging. And I just wonder if you wanted to say a little bit about that.
You always touch on that, Chief? Well, I was going to say, clearly, we've spoken already about our plans around enforcement, and we absolutely want to celebrate each success and make it absolutely clear in terms of the hostile environment that we're creating and the likelihood of what happens if you offend in the Somerset area. So that would be the biggest strength that we would want to bring through the corporate communications department. And you're right, because it isn't just around a focus on victims and communities that are suffering from. This is a real around a perpetrator focus to make it clear that's who we're going after, and that's our relentless focus.
To add to that, one of the learnings we're taking from the Operation Bluestone approach is the importance of human psychology, offender psychology, victim psychology, indeed our psychology. And I do think communications and messaging is also a capability and a tool that you can use in the fight against crime and those who present risk of harm. So we're looking in that investment we're making into our corporate comms department for a new capability to develop that actually exploits human psychology. It's likely to have a much greater disruptive effect than just boots on the ground. It certainly enhances and augments them. So that is something very much within our focus.
Yes, and please don't forget how much the public like that visible policing as part of reassurance, as well as that deterrent, and also from the ability to gather intelligence on the streets. Okay, let's change focus if we may. You know, Chief Constable, you know how I feel about citizens in policing, those Peelian principles of policing, which I bang on about at every opportunity. It's so important around that engagement and prevention. For example, all the neighbourhood watches, the schemes, the volunteers, the speed watches, etc. How are you supporting these various watch schemes across Avon and Somerset, and how do you feel that they will grow and increase community safety?
Well, I'm going to ask John to speak on this one because I feel the same as you exactly about the role of citizens in policing and citizens in our communities. And John leads and the citizens in policing portfolio and strategy for us. So John is best placed, but I know he's passionate about it too. And I think that will come across in what he's got to say.
Yeah, so thank you, Chief Constable. I think the first thing to say is we are really lucky in Avon and Somerset to have so many people that step forward and want to volunteer and assist us. And I think it's an opportunity to say thank you to them, actually, if they're viewing this broadcast. So that will be one of the first things I want to say, but you'll be well aware that we have a number of watch schemes in the force. With a really good track history, actually. And if I touch on each of them, perhaps individually, that might be helpful. So the neighbourhood watch you've already mentioned, we're working very closely with the national team, actually, to see how we can improve our local offer. We very recently held a masterclass in North Somerset, where we had really good engagement, some of the local neighbourhood watch coordinators, where they came together to talk through some of the issues and the challenges, but how we as a constabulary can assist them. And over the course of the autumn, we're looking to roll that out more widely to other neighbourhood watch areas, which is important. And also in that space, we have a program called Community Alerts, where we provide information to neighbourhood watch groups. What we're looking to do now is working hard to see if we can expand that out to everybody that wants to be signed up, because the more information we can get out, the better. But neighbourhood watch is working really well, and there's a strong focus there. Community Speed Watch, I know, is something that you know very much about, but over the last 12 months, we've seen 4,500 operations, roadside operations take place, which is a 10% increase from the previous year, and that's testament to the hard work of the volunteers that we have, and we have actually recruited some more volunteers because of that. But the intelligence that gives us enables us to really proactively deploy our road safety teams and our road policing teams to make sure they're tackling the areas where speeding is an issue. So they are a really important tool in what we're seeking to achieve. But to ensure that we are working with them effectively, we've set in place a sort of service level agreement with the neighbourhood policing teams, how frequently the engagement with them will be. We've also introduced a volunteer lead individual to make sure that communication between the volunteers and the police is enhanced. And we're actually developing a business case at the moment to create a dedicated role to manage the community speed watch, such as the growth. So you spoke about the increase that we're seeing. That's how we're going to hopefully manage some of that and ensure that we can continue the partnership that we've already established. Moving on again into farm watch and horse watch, this is an area that's also expanding. So we've got over 4,000 farm watch schemes and over 2,000 horse watch schemes right across the force. There's an even spread across the force. And they receive regular engagement and key messages from our Rural Affairs unit. As you know, we've increased through the uplift, recognising the particular concerns of the rural community. And we identify and publicise those schemes at rural events and fairs, or through TAC and plant marking opportunities. And again, we're getting the neighbourhood beat teams really engaged with those watches, making sure that they know where they are, the signage is appropriate. And I think little by little we're making real progress in that area. But what I would say, and I go back to the beginning, is we are really lucky to have so many people that are willing to step up with us. And as you say, the Pillion principle around, the public being the police, and that is so evident in the watch schemes. Again, with all of these things, there's probably more that we could do, but I'm really proud of the work that we're doing already across those 4 areas of business.
It's good to hear, and certainly when I go out on my engagements and I talk to the members of the public, how important it is. I stopped. I was on my bicycle actually on Friday doing an engagement in Bath, and I happened to be bicycling past Greenfield Avenue in Bath, and I saw a community speed watch. I got off my bike, went and talked to them, and they certainly feel a change in that service level agreement, which was good to know. And more that we can do about that and kit to support them. And also on the farm watch element, when I've been to visit some farms recently, there was a view of the value of that rural crime team, advising them from the point of view of equipment and general security and safety pieces. They really valued that. Because there's no monopoly on good ideas, and you might think you've got it all buttoned up safe, and then somebody else, different pair of eyes, looks over it and sees something different, and they value that. So the more that we can do around there, the better. I think that
totally agree. It's been in the news this week, hasn't it? The uplift in rural crime, and it's pleased to see that the constabularies responded to that before the headlines. So great to hear the feedback. Thank you.
Terrific. Right, I'm now going to hand over to the Chief Staff for a few more detailed questions.
Thank you. So turning to the criminal justice system now, there is a lot more data available now that shows us how the performance of Avon and Somerset compares to the national picture. And we can see that Avon and Somerset take longer to reach a police charging decision compared to the sort of national average. That, however, did improve. We can see between 2019 and 21, the gap closed. I wondered if you could tell us how that's been achieved and how, I suppose more importantly, it will be sustained with the cohort of new officers that are being recruited as part of the national uplift, as we've been talking about, given that they won't have the same level of experience.
Okay, I think it's important for us to say what a police charge decision is, as opposed to a Crown Prosecution Service charge decision. So people are clear. A police charge decision, there are certain decisions that the police can make where the cases can be triable in a summary way in the magistrates' court. or it can be tried either in the Magistrates Court or the Crown Court. But there's an early guilty plea, and it can be dealt with in a summary way. So it's not every, or indeed most, charging decisions we have. That said, as you say, we have seen an improvement. I think we were at 80 days as a median in 2019, and we're at 60 days now. And there are a number of things that will have contributed to that and that improvement so far. We did have in 2020 something called the Criminal Justice Task Force, which was a core group of dedicated people, both police and Crown Prosecution Service, but supported by subject matter experts and champions within different directorates to really focus down on our file quality. And so specific things that will have contributed here will have been really improved investigative standards in our detainee investigation teams, supported by improved access to guidance, and we developed some case file templates to make it easy for people to get it right within our technology. We also provided everyone with greater guidance and operation protocols around things like the use of pre-charge bail, when you release under investigation, and voluntary attendance. And we supported that with the development of analytical data, which could enable us to really understand and give scrutiny to the management of those cases, the real detail that drives the speed at which the system operates. We also introduced our enhanced incident assessment unit. So this assessment unit sits alongside our control room, and it looks at those low complexity cases that can be progressed in an expedited way, but from the desktop. So we're not actually tying up an operational officer. They're free to attend cases, but by focusing that way, we can really build up the skills and capabilities of that dedicated team. So we brought some specialism there. We also upgraded our crime allocation guidance. So that meant that, you know, those offenders that are repeat offenders, they're being dealt with by the same person once, and so we can really be efficient in our management of those cases. And we're keen to try and equip officers in the case in this context with the tools they need to be really effective and efficient. So we created something called the My Work app, which means that people can look at their tasks, their data quality, the work that they've got in their workload and caseload, and be able to manage it more effectively. All of those things will have contributed. More recently, we've had a real focus on investigative standards. There's more to do, but specifically the value of the supervisor review to give direction and clarity and focus to an investigation. So we are focused that the activity we do is relevant and not either disproportionate or unnecessary, which takes more time. And we've seen real improvements. So we monitor the number of cases within 7 days that have seen a meaningful supervisor review. We've seen an improvement by 14.9%. And I checked before I came in for it 28 days, because it's not just the first review, it's constant. We've seen a 32.8% increase across the board. So I think that detailed grip and understanding and guidance and upskilling of those that deal with the bulk of the cases will have made the difference. Looking forward, that learning, that discipline, actually the new officers, that's not a risk, lack of experience. It means that you can teach it from the beginning. Actually, sometimes it's easier to teach things new and fresh than it is to try to correct old habits, etc. So it is embedded within our new routes. But overall, this needs constant oversight. So Assistant Chief Constable Will White is our investigative standards lead. Our investigative standards work has been bolstered by him chairing a forum and delivery group for investigative standards, which covers each and every one of our operational directorates to drive further improvement. We've recently come to the end of a review of our criminal justice process from call to court as well, and that will see us in the autumn, in the winter, making some transactional changes to how we do things, but also I think some fairly fundamental transformational things, which some technology, but really focused around really strong investigative capability and mindset, unrelentless perpetrator focus, taking the Bluestone learning where we're seeing green shoots of improvement. But ultimately, yes, we have to deal with the demand that comes from the public, but the public also want us to see more offenders brought to justice. And the real core aim of that, the investigative standards group and those changes we're making, is to see an improvement not just in timeliness but in outcomes too.
Chief Constable, you've mentioned a number of times around integrated offender management. I noticed that our local levels of reoffending match those nationally. And we know that the more offences a person has on the record, the more likely they are to reoffend when they are released from prison. I mean, and we also know that 80% of people who are sent to prison have been in prison before.
Yeah.
So why isn't it just as simple as focusing only on them in order to stop all crime?
I think you become a integrated offender management subject with your first offence. So I actually believe it's a continuum that we have to, and you know, ACC Riley is articulated that very well. I think our core is we do focus on the perpetrator, but our understanding is sophisticated. In line with your plan, we need to prevent and deter and intervene early before somebody becomes active, becomes a potential, down a route of becoming the 20% who commit the 80%. While they're there, we have to be relentless in catching them, disrupting them, and convicting them. That's a core role of policing. Once they are there, very, very quickly, or sometimes a bit later, they themselves find that place, a place they don't want to be and a place they want to get out of. The vast majority of criminals that I've ever come into contact with do not want to be there. They want to path out. And so it's very important that we work with partners at the other end, and that's where IOM sits, trying to find pathways out of that cycle of crime. So I'd say our strategy of integrated offender management has that whole gamut, not just the active targeting in focus, but the two ends of that spectrum do require engagement with our partners.
And you know, I'm doing a project on housing and pods that are built by prisoners and then perhaps put on meanwhile sites to give them some sort of accommodation, as we know that's one of the most single important aspects of preventing reoffending. Anyway, we'll talk more about that as we go on. I'd now like to move on to the fourth section, and this is loosely described as further discussion around HMIC FRS. So Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services. And I'd like to focus on the super complaint around police perpetrated domestic abuse. The report highlights Avon and Somerset as one of the forces that have adopted a force pledge on this. Can you please tell me how this works in practice?
Okay, absolutely. Well, the domestic abuse, or DA pledge, as it's called, we introduced that in January. It was very much led by Chief Inspector Sharon Baker, who is a very credible leader in this field, and a very brave and courageous one, having shared her own personal experiences of domestic abuse publicly. It's in recognition that, as in Sharon's story, domestic abuse doesn't discriminate. It can happen to officers, staff, volunteers who work in policing, and there's a responsibility for the organisation to protect them. So our pledge to those victims in policing are: you'll be listened to, you will be believed, you will have control over the process, we'll support you, we'll maintain your confidentiality as much as we possibly can, and we will keep you safe. And the pledge is supported by some guidance for first victims, but also colleagues and supervisors under each of those 6 areas, what that actually means in practice to be listened to. And examples of these would be, we've amended our policy for compassionate leave to cater for victims of domestic abuse and police perpetrated domestic abuse, but in a way that the person doesn't feel that they're a victim, and there can be a degree of confidentiality about that. Similarly, another example would be ensuring that victims of domestic abuse and police perpetrated domestic abuse can access independent domestic violence advisory services, but in a confidential way, because clearly they're engaging with them on a day-to-day basis as part of their work as well. So that's how the pledge is working in practice.
Well, will you please thank the Chief Inspector Sharon Baker for her courage in coming forward and discussing this so openly and guiding the others. I think Sharon talked about her supervisor and colleagues offering her unwavering support when she told them about her abuse. However, how can you make sure all the workforce demonstrates this same empathy and compassion?
So, as I said, the pledge itself is very specific on the ask of supervisors. It's not generic, it's very targeted to them and what's required. But it's been reinforced by Sharon in her personal leadership, supported by us, actually enabled by us in a number of news stories, blogs. She's spoken on many platforms, but not least in briefings and training events. So, for instance, we have regular training events for our entire patrol directorate. Sharon's spoken to and had a connection with every single patrol officer as a result of that. She also speaks at leadership events and meetings as well. It's included in our new starter packages and in our leadership packages too. And we have built, Sharon is our domestic abuse lead, not just police perpetrator, but wider. We've established under her leadership a network of individuals from every swathe of the constabulary who are ambassadors for domestic abuse, called our DA influencers, so that there's a constant discussion going on. And at the beginning of the meeting, I talked about the DA Matters programme, which is which tackles culture and attitudes too around domestic abuse. That rolls out from September, and that will touch 3,000 frontline officers, staff and leaders.
The consistent theme of this report is that the police do not properly consider the unique risks posed by perpetrators that are police employees. In Avon and Somerset, what are the additional steps taken when a suspect works for you?
So there are a range of different tactics that we can take. So we can monitor the use of police systems, for instance, in our counter-corruption unit. We can place, where there is an allegation, restrictions on a suspected perpetrator, or indeed suspension of a suspected perpetrator. We can also do things to safeguard the victim alongside them. We do use covert policing tactics. I'm not going to go into the detail of what those covert policing tactics are, but we are combining those with the learning from our Bluestone programme about offender psychology and perpetrator focus. And we're also exploring ways, and we have a growing appreciation for the value that academics can bring to policing. Our counter-corruption teams are also working with Bournemouth University to look at the risk indicators for police perpetrators and how we might use those risk indicators to intervene early and identify early to prevent someone becoming a perpetrator, or to contain behaviour that may be getting out of hand at an earlier stage, or indeed to identify a perpetrator we've not yet had reported to us. So we have now a specific policy still in draft. It will be signed off in September on police perpetrated domestic abuse, so that there is due focus on this problem. So there are a range of different things. We are working as well with a social enterprise provider who has expertise in sexual violence, including sexual violence within the workforce, and we're looking to build a cohort of confidants, advocates within the workforce, by which people who may be victims can come to seek advice, signposting, guidance on what the next steps for them are, as well as support.
Good. I'm pleased about that. I noticed in the report that very few allegations of police perpetrated domestic abuse have led to misconduct outcomes. Nationally, of the 122 allegations the report looked at, only 6 resulted in dismissal. What processes are there in place in Avon and Somerset to make sure these criminal complaints are also treated as misconduct matters? And can you assure me that the perpetrators of domestic abuse would not be allowed to continue to work for Avon and Somerset Police?
So these allegations in Avon and Somerset will be dealt with by our professional standards department, of which the counter-corruption unit are part of. They're made up of some of our most skilled investigators, and I've taken great pains to make sure that they have that detective credibility. They are able to operate both within the criminal law, but also the details, which is a very different regime, of the police conduct regulations and standards of professional behaviour. So my own experience, and I was the appropriate authority in my previous role, is that we always look at these cases through the prism of both criminal and misconduct at the same time, and we go down both routes at the same time. Sometimes it makes sense for criminal to come first, so not to interfere or compromise a criminal trial, but we are able to take both tracks at the same time, and we invariably do. It's quite, there is no place as Chief Constable for proven perpetrators of domestic abuse in Avon and Somerset Constabulary. Nothing is more important, well, some things are as important, but nothing more important for me other than to root those people out and boot them out, actually, frankly. I don't usually use language like that, but I do it intentionally. When someone is convicted in a criminal court, that criminal conviction can be brought before the Chief Constable in the misconduct process, and that case will be heard by the Chief Constable, and the sanction of dismissal is available to me in that context. I can't envisage circumstances where a proven somebody with a criminal conviction for domestic abuse stays in this organisation. Where something doesn't meet the criminal threshold, perhaps there's been an acquittal, or perhaps the criminal threshold of reasonable, realistic prospect of conviction isn't met. The standard for police misconduct is lesser. It's on the balance of probabilities, so there still is a route to a gross misconduct hearing. That's chaired by a panel, including a legally qualified chair, a senior officer and a layperson. Again, dismissal is available, as are other sanctions. My experience of those panels, when they've heard those cases, is they invariably dismiss. If that didn't happen, I think I, as Chief Constable, would seriously consider use of a judicial review, which is the only recourse open to me at that stage. So whilst I can't give a complete guarantee, because I don't have complete power in every aspect, I can guarantee that a judicial review would be actively considered and implemented, if appropriate, if it was possible, because I think it would send a very strong message to the workforce, but also the public, about where the constabulary's stance is on domestic abuse.
Chief Constable, thank you for that. And I want to move on now to a related topic, which was in the Peel Spotlight report, shining a light on betrayal. This was the report by the Inspectorate of Police Services on the very serious issue of abuse of position for sexual purposes. Vetting is critical to helping prevent this type of offending. And there's never been a more stark highlighted case and circumstances than around Wayne Couzens prior to the kidnap, rape and murder of Sarah Everard. Can you assure me that all of Avon and Somerset employees are vetted before they start work? And secondly, and important in the case of Wayne Couzens, can you tell me about the process of re-vetting within your workplace?
Okay, so in policing, we use the College of Policing's vetting code of practice and the authorised professional practice, which details how we use that code. So every role within the constabulary has a vetting level ascribed to it. And when somebody wants to join our constabulary, they are given a vetting form which they fill out, and we assess it according to that professional practice. No one is given vetting clearance until those full vetting checks are completed, and recruitment processes per se won't be finalised, and that sometimes causes some frustration and delay until that vetting certificate is issued. There are occasional cases where we will issue provisional vetting on the basis of a risk assessment. Even with a risk assessment, the circumstances may be we need someone in very, very quickly in the public interest, and we need to expedite. Where a risk assessment takes place, there will still be a core level of checks that will be done. The Police National Computer is an example, and checks that the Professional Standards Department can do around professional issues from previous employers, etc. Any risk assessment as well is always signed off by only one person, and that's our senior information risk owner, or CIRO, which is my Deputy Chief Constable Nikki Watson, and she does to a very clear policy that's signed off. When it comes to re-vetting, every vetting, that even when someone has been vetted, there is a stipulated renewal date. We use our data analytics to flag when a renewal is required, and we proactively encourage people then to fill the form out, and we go through the same process again. Now, when someone moves from one role to another, they may need a different level of vetting. When that happens, we don't allow them to move until that re-vetting at that new level has been done. And people individually may have changes in their life circumstances which mean they need to be re-vetted. So there is a responsibility on the individual, prompted through our annual review process, and reminded that they must disclose to us those changes so we can then reassess. There are also triggered reviews, and that where the case of Wayne Couzens comes in. So when someone transfers into Avon and Somerset, or maybe someone's left and they rejoin, someone's taken a career break, or they've been seconded to another agency for some time, we will always do full re-vetting before they come back into the organisation and commence those roles.
Thank you for that. I mean, I in my previous existence in the military, I've been vetted a number of times at different levels, and that business about change of circumstances is really important when I have initiated vetting on other people, because I have been concerned, and I can't overstate that, how important that gut feel as a leader or as a commander. Somebody's just different. There's something different about them.
And that's why what we call the IPQR, the individual professional review, it is an annual review, but it's also a regime of regular chats, job chats, and more formal quarterly reviews, which is a conversation, a dialogue where the supervisor and leader can form that prompt, but also form that view of whether it's required as well.
Good. I mean, the report also highlights the importance of being proactive and seeking out those officers and staff who've committed these awful acts. Can you tell me about your work of the counter-corruption unit does to prevent this threat?
So our counter-corruption unit, we have recently reviewed and we've invested in. So we have more investigators in that team now. We're putting in more intelligence staff, and we have increased our leadership footprint within our professional standards units to create a detective chief inspector to lead our counter-corruption unit. Previously it was a detective inspector, so we've added an additional role there as well. That's all of, as I've said before, these are credible investigators, and that DCI is a proven investigator and intelligence manager. The reason we've made that investment is because we want to move onto the front foot here, as you say, to be proactive. The work we're doing on analytics, triggers, Bournemouth University, utilising our own data and some of our covert policing tactics mean we've got the capability as well as the capacity now to do that. I'm not going to go into full details of the things we'll do. I mean, I would suffice it to say, we've all watched Line of Duty. We've seen that there are a range of capabilities available.
Including the wee donkey.
Well, the wee donkey as well. I'm not sure wee donkey. I was going to say there are some things we'd exclude. But those tactics and those kind of tactics, if they're legal and they're ethical, we will be using them to identify and to target those kind of perpetrators within our midst. It's key to public confidence. It's plea to policing by consent. I said boot them out and root them out, and that's the mechanism by which we do that. We do need colleagues within the organisation to be not bystanders and upstanders when they see things that are wrong. And we are looking at cultural change to achieve that, but I'm confident we've made the right decisions. It's worth saying in closing that it's not by accident that our professional standards unit, which incorporates vetting and counter-corruption, is led by 4 highly credible female leaders. It's really relevant for this space. I think we're unique in that. It changes the mindset and the lens through which we look at some of these issues.
Chief Constable, thank you. And that cultural piece within those new officers about having the courage to speak out when they get that gut feel that something's not right is incredibly important. And I'm very supportive of your work in this area and that leadership training that you are giving those new and young commanders. Well, this draws the Performance and Accountability Board to a close. Many thanks to Chief Constable and Assistant Chief Constable John Riley, and also my Chief of Staff and the team behind the cameras who've made it all work. Thank you. And to those who have watched either live or recorded, thank you very much for your time. And please do comment on the short questionnaire on my website in order to see if we can make it better and improve it. Thank you very much. Goodbye.